So good morning. How is everybody?
Doing all right.
Good conference? Learning something? My name is Eric Sontag, and I'm with Dun & Bradstreet. How many of you have heard of Dun & Bradstreet? How many of you use Dun & Bradstreet? That's excellent. So I am the VP of Systems Integration, Channel Development for that particular program in our Global Alliances Network. I'm not here to do a product pitch. I'm here to introduce a panel. But there's three things I want you to walk away with about D&B. Number one, we deliver the broadest set of business data and commercial insight and contact data in the world. Two, we are your premier source for identity resolution and business verification. Sounds like a common problem in search of a resolution. And number three, with respect to GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, especially as it pertains to supply chain management and procurement, we're also key to your solution. All of those elements, all of those benefits are relevant to today's discussion. I'm not going to talk. I'm going to introduce our partner and the bus of D&B employees we brought to the discussion today for Q&A. So moving from right to left is Paul Witherow. Paul is with 100 Answers. He's an implementation partner for our product called D&B 360. And yes, that's my phone ringing.
Should I hang up now?
An implementation partner, Webfortis, who also implements D&B 360. And Vimal, he's our Vice President of Solution Strategy for Global Alliances Network. And then our guest speaker from Canada, the federal equivalent of our National Sciences Institute, Bruce Langevin. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul to moderate, to Bruce to discuss, and when you have questions, throw them at the panel. Don't throw them at me, throw them at the panel. Any questions before we begin? All good? Okay, Paul.
I'll just say a few words before we turn it over to Bruce. Just how we were hoping to do this was, I think Bruce will go for 20-25 minutes, and then we'll do a few moderated questions, and then we'll turn around if there are any Q&As that you have bubbling up. At the same time, just like Eric said, if there's anything you want to ask, just break on in. We all learn that way. So. One of the things that whenever I come to these conferences, I'm always curious about is why you picked this session versus one of the others. Right? At the same time, there's pockets of greatness. There's customer service through business process reengineering. But something brought you to this one, and it's interesting when we're looking at the marketing pitch that was sort of the outline. It had something to do with a personalized online presence that was seamless and secure. It had that intelligent case management system, and then one source of truth, right? And together you get that new citizen services, that's what we're calling it, and that platform. Now, the curious thing about that's very technology. That's very technology speaking. So hopefully, one of the things that we'll dive into too is obviously there's a lot here around for customer service around people and process and even policy. So hopefully, hopefully in the presentation you'll see some of that come out, as well as certainly feel free to ask questions about that. We aren't just technology. My background is actually not technology. I'm actually coming from a policy background in government. So with that, actually one question before I go right now, and just why you picked this session. So how many of you here currently have organizations that are doing something, some initiative or some goals around customer service? Just show your hand. Okay. How many of those are primarily focused around sort of the process or the people side of it? Okay, so a few. And how many of those are focused around the technology aspects of it? Okay, good. So it's a good mix here. So definitely, I think we have some great representation here from with Sam coming from Washington, D.C. He can give you a bunch of different perspectives with states and the federal, and Vimal as well on that. So hopefully we can have a bit of a sharing here today. Turn it over to Bruce.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and if you live in Ottawa, Canada, like I do, it's also a pleasure to leave 3 feet of snow and to be able to walk to the conference in a suit jacket. A bit of context here. It says former Director General. That's not because I have trouble keeping a job. That is because I've just recently moved from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council to be the Director of Operational Excellence for the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, which is our equivalent to your Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. But the interesting context here for you is I've been asked to take on that responsibility to undertake the same service transformation objectives that we put in place at the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council. So I'm sure not altogether different from the U.S. federal and state context. The Canadian federal government and provincial governments are all about transforming the way we deliver our services to citizens. And it's the principles that we implemented during this case study that we're using on a repeatable basis to bring the same value, business outcomes, and value to citizens that we saw achieved in the work that we did with NSERC. I think you'll agree with me that the Internet of Everything has changed client expectations forever. Pretty much everything is available online. Your banking information and money, health information, travel, you name it, you can get it. In fact, in my personal situation, it's amazing to me that my wife and I, we own 2 properties in Canada. We have lines of credit and credit cards and everything else everybody else has. But I visit a physical bank about once every 3 years. Don't really need to go to the physical presence to renew my mortgage, to up my credit line or bring it down, to move money around, to make investments. And the reality of the Canadian context is that citizens have come and demanded to expect the same type of responsive service to whatever they're asking for, whether it's grants or their driver's license or their social security card or so on, and the same responsiveness from their government representatives that they get from the private sector. And it's also interesting that studies have shown us in Canada that despite less face-to-face interaction, they feel better known and understood because of the repeatability of the transactions that they go through. But we've found, which will come to as no surprise here, that the key to making this work is turning data into knowledge. Now, the one thing I'm going to tell you, Paul mentioned technology. This was my second transformational initiative. I'm on my third. And what we've come to realize is it has nothing to do with technology. The technology is the easy part. I'll tell you that agnostically, I don't care what solution you pick. I have my preferences. The technology kind of responds for itself. It can bring the results that you want it to do. But what really matters in terms of transformation of citizen-centered services are 3 things. One is processes. We need to have standardized processes in order to repeatedly implement the changes that we want. If every program we run, if every department that runs programs, if every level of government operates on a different basis, you have difficulty repeating and quickly acclimatizing to the change. The second thing is culture. Delivering services this way means that the public service has to change its culture, the way in which it does something, and the Canadian Public Service is undertaking and undergoing that change as we speak. The last, and I would say most important underlying driver here is data. In order to make this a reality, we need to have reliable, trustworthy data that we can use to drive services back to our clients, to our citizens. We need to know who we're talking to. We need to reuse that data so that we can lessen the burden of administration on those that demand our services, and we need to rely on that data that we have. If you look at this slide up here, what we've undertaken in the federal context in Canada is we look at our activities all as cases, because at the end of the day, they really are. And I'll tell you that this took us 3 or 4 years to get people to change their mindset. I'm going to suggest to you that whether it's a privacy request, whether it's an application for a driver's license, whether it's an application for a grant or a loan guarantee, it's all a case. You're making an application, there are emails exchanged, there might be phone calls exchanged, there are applications and responses, there are fine-tuning of the information that we have, but as we deal with it from a case perspective, we have the ability to apply this case approach to all the transactions that we undertake, and as a result, lessen that administrative burden on our citizens. A little bit of background. NSERC and SHRC, Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. They, for all intents and purposes, are the funding arm for academic research from the federal government in Canada. We put out just a little bit under $2 billion a year in academic research. And when I was brought on to undertake this transformation, a few realities existed, which may resonate with you this morning, or you may be dealing with in your own situation. Every program, there was more than 100 of them, used a slightly different process to manage their grant process. And they all thought they were special. You've heard that probably. So they can't change their processes because they're unique. They all use different systems, and unfortunately, none of those systems talked to each other. Let me give you a little anecdotal information. When I first got there, they launched a new program to fund research in photonics. And one of the requirements to qualify for the grant was you had to have received your PhD within the last 3 years. So this is the process they put in place. They put in an application form up on the web that wasn't collecting data, it was collecting static information in a PDF form. It was something like 11 pages long, and you know what the last question was before you press submit? When did you receive your PhD? You can imagine the frustration, right? 3 hours later, signing in all their publications, all the professional work that they had done, all down to the bottom, and they got their PhD 5 years previously and they didn't qualify for the grant. A lot of frustration that we needed to address in terms of the way in which we had delivered our programs. Patchwork of systems, financial and others across the councils, and so a new strategic plan was put in place in this new grant management system, and a change in the way we identified our process was the key to it. I'm going to jump forward a slide here. We need to identify some benefits, if you will, that were not necessarily financial. One of them was improved experience for our clients, improved experience for our internal staff. We needed to look at a reduction in financial risk because we had auditability and we had the ability to track the information that was coming in. It also reduced our compliance risk and provided us some internal controls. And as a result, we came up with what we call the research portal. And I'll describe it to you. In support of both councils, we have a single window for all Canadian citizens that do business with the councils. So whether you're an applicant looking for a grant, or a committee member evaluating grant applications, or an employee of the councils running a grant management program, you all come in through the same portal. You all have a unique ID and password, and we provide the opportunity for you to interact with the system on a roles-based approach. So for example, we have individuals that apply for grants, but they also evaluate grant applications. They can log in as an applicant, they can log in as a committee member, they can log in as a manager or an employee. And the system tracks that information. The system then takes that application, which collects the data, and through automated workflows, directs it to the next available officer who's going to do the initial valuation of that grant. Once that initial evaluation is done, the workflow picks up the grant again and sends it to the initial evaluation committee that prioritizes the applications and then assigns them to committees automatically by those who have identified that they were available for evaluations. When there's any interactions with our applicants during the course of the application process, all that information is tracked in the same grant management, case management system, so you always have an up-to-date set of information as to what's gone on prior to that interaction. The email is in the case file. Now we have applicants, this is going to shock you, that if they call the councils and they don't like the answer they get, they call somebody else. And then they call somebody else and somebody else. Well, that's kind of gone the way of the dodo because the officer that picks up that phone call or gets that email can begin by responding, I understand you spoke to Jane yesterday and here's what she told you. Nothing's changed. The rules haven't changed for the program. Really expedited the ability to move these processes along. Once the committees meet to evaluate the applications, they actually electronically display the grant management system up on a screen and start to evaluate the applications right within the system itself. At the end of the day, the same portal that the applicants have used to apply for their grant is used to give them the results of the competition. Congratulations, you've been awarded the grant. Or condolences, someone else was awarded the grant in your stead. And we handle all the interactions between those applicants and the councils, committee members and the councils within the same system. It has provided auditability, huge increase in client satisfaction, but also another benefit that we weren't aware that we were going to glean right from the outset, and that is this, that other studies in the Canadian federal context have proven that an increase in client satisfaction also shows an increase in employee satisfaction. And the employee satisfaction indexes within the councils and within the federal government as a whole raise in accordance with the increase in client satisfaction. And you can see that correlation, right? You're not getting the angry calls because the PDF got lost in the process. You're not getting the angry calls because you can't get any information except talking to a real person. All applicants can log back in through the portal and see the status of their application. Received, in progress, being evaluated, awarded. More than 50% of our calls in the old system before we took over and modernized the way we deliver these services were for two things. Did you receive my application? Can you guess the second one? I lost my password. So we have an automatic password reset. They take care of it themselves. And they also have an automatic status ability that we provide them so that they can answer their own questions and free up our staff, thus the satisfaction rates within the councils, to do more value-added activities against the work that they're doing. This picture here shows the approach that we really advocate, which is one of continual service improvement. And the last piece just to touch base in is the idea of the data, which is really critical. Especially on our partners, we have programs that have private-public sector partnerships. We were really in a bad situation in that we were unable to accurately identify those who came in from the private sector from a company perspective as to who they were, could we rely on them, were we putting the government at risk? And by using data that we were able to partner with, we were able to raise our comfort level in terms of those interactions, and we were able to automate the acceptance of those partnerships because of the confidence we had in knowing who we were doing business with. What you have up here on the screen is a generic, if you will, picture of how we built the system. You'll notice that from document management all the way up to the portal, which I described, is seamless. The client doesn't see the interaction between it. We have a rules engine and a workflow. We also have a direct connectivity to our financial system. And what this also provides us in terms of adaptability is because we have put the business rules for the programs in a separate rules engine, we can change them on the fly without impacting the delivery of the program. To be very, very nimble in responding to new programs. Our government comes up with programs from time to time. They want to get them out quickly. In the old way of doing things, that would require a lot of manual intervention, a lot of coding. Here we're using a GUI and we're changing business rules on the fly to allow ourselves to respond, if you will, to the changes that we've been asked to address. I want to talk a little bit, just in closing, about some of the barriers and building blocks that we have discovered and that we're reusing across the federal government. And the first is this, that ideally the channel choice in terms of how we deliver our processes and programs needs to be informed by data on the relative cost of those channels. I think gone are the days where we put our thumb in the air and say, I think the web's the best approach. More often than not, the web is the best approach, but we need valid, verifiable data that shows the comparison in the cost between the phone, in person, and the web, for example. Once we implemented this new system, we saw huge decreases in our service desk costs because the call volumes went way down, because those 50% of the normal calls went the way of the dodo as well. They knew the status of their application, and they also were able to adjust their password and other security features themselves. We also saw a real increase in satisfaction because of the reliability of the platform. Our largest program, so our research scientists who apply, they are famous for waiting to the last day in the program to apply for their grant. Why they do that, I'm not 100% sure, but they do it. And in the old system, what would happen almost all the time was everybody would come in at once. You'd have 20 or 30,000 applicants in there at the same time. Everything ground to a halt. The systems went down, and we had to extend the deadlines, which had a lot of political consequences to it. In our new system, in our first year, at the height of our largest program, we had 225,000 applicants on the last day, and we were able to manage without any problem nearly 30,000 concurrent users. That performance made a big difference in terms of the credibility of the councils. The second point here is that the quality of the online services needs to be as good or better than the traditional channels. And that's where that culture change comes in that we've experienced within the federal context, and I'm sure you have or will in your own context as well. We need to change the way we're thinking, but we also need to provide services that are perceived to be as reliable, verifiable, and user-friendly as the old services, which was, I know Bob, I can go to the desk, the one-on-one type of approach. And so we really need to develop our services to adapt to those things. And your data and your information needs to be trusted. What happens now in the second and third year of this process is when an applicant comes in, and I'll be closing with this, their application is pre-populated from the last time they visit us. So last year they applied for a grant. This year, everything stays the same except perhaps the name of the research, different research, the value of the grant they're applying for, and perhaps their university because they've changed the college or university that they're affiliated with. But other than that, everything is pre-populated for them. It's, in essence, we're asking them, tell us if anything's changed, and change it. And if you want to see some really powerful statistics, the average application in the old system took 7 days. In the new system, less than an hour. And that's because you're not typing and typing and typing. We are reusing, we've streamlined the process to ask for less information, and we've separated the nice-to-haves from what do we really need to adequately address an application. Last slide. We need to know the kinds of self-service innovations that are available and adapt the ones that are most applicable to our business lines. We need to have a solid and consistent data foundation for all of our programs, and we need to enable common data sharing. Single financial data across 2 councils, single applicant data across 2 councils because we have applicants that apply to both, and the reuse of that to provide efficiencies, consistency, and integrity to the data itself. And then we need to build, as we have, and maintain those trusted data sources so that the credibility remains in place and our ability to use the data remains solid. I'm going to stop there, give you an idea of what we've done, and just remind you that we're repeating this process now at Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation because we see the value in it. I'm going to turn it back over to Paul, and then he'll open it up and allow you to have any questions you might have.
Thanks, Bruce. Do you want to switch them up?
Oh, I could, I guess, sure.
Yeah. So, we have a question.
So, with regards to managing the system so that it wasn't impacted by high traffic volumes, it sounded as though part of that might have been handled through the pre-filling of the forms from prior logins, but it sounded as though part of it might also be due to the breaking out of different sub-processes so that they weren't taking up processor space when they weren't needed. Would like a little more
Sure.
elaboration on
Sure, and if you want to get really technical, we can take it offline afterwards, but some of the big things that we did. So we consciously, from an architectural perspective, went to brokered services. So we have an integration hub in between the front end, if you will, the portal, and the CRM solution we use in the back, and between that and the financial systems. So basically, it handles all those brokered transactions, doesn't leave the connections open, which is chewing up processing time, but it also allows us only to concentrate on the processes, which I think you've already alluded to, that we really need to undertake the continuance of that application. So that was a big area that we addressed, and I will also tell you that we provided an architecture through virtualization that was scalable based on the volume of applications that were coming in, that we could ramp up and or down on a moment's notice because of the power of virtualization. Those are the two areas that really provided us our performance in.
Now, we say that technology can more or less stand up to all this. A member of my staff actually got his PhD written on a white paper on the architecture we did. So it was pretty advanced. It was kind of neat working for the Natural Sciences Engineering organization, and we're actually creating new knowledge as well, right? So. It was funny, we talked about data here, and you have to imagine the change in culture from where you have a floor full of boxes and boxes of applications and paper, and a whole records division. And this floods in every time there's a major competition, going to none of that. And on top of that, it's not in boxes anymore, but it's in a system, and a lot of it's being turned into data, structured data, rather than an unstructured, unsearchable format, right? The power that gives to the program officers and managers and directors is incredible. So now when, the inevitable question that comes down that says, what are we doing in photonics? They don't have to go leafing through their binders and binders or go into the system and try to search on the perfect keyword. They can actually do a whole bunch of different things, contextual search and a whole bunch of different ways to organize that data and actually collect it and be able to report on it, right? And that's truly one of the big things here. One other thing that I should add, just as context, and Bruce doesn't toot his horn often, but the Government of Canada, coming out of, this was really a Pathfinder project for the Government of Canada. And what it resulted in was actually the Government of Canada, later on, and my firm helped do that, was actually set the case management standard. The entire Government of Canada now has one case management solution as a standard. So it's gone from this application or the solution for a small agency, even though it has a good amount of funding that goes through it, to now the entire Government of Canada, and they're looking at upwards of 150,000 users of this system, right? So it's very big. Microsoft, of course, it's based on Microsoft technology. They're very happy. They've done a global case study on it as well. And so, the question for you is, do you have the opportunity in your own organization to be that pathfinder? And maybe some of you already are heading down that path, maybe with a different technology or not. But the impact on your entire state government can be huge, right? If you can be one of those pathfinder organizations that can combine, as Bruce said, not just the technology and the data, but also the process and the policy side on this, right? And manage your organization through that change. If you can do it successfully, it might not just change your organization, it might actually change how your state works. And that gets pretty exciting, because now you're not affecting just, if you're in a licensing and permitting space, or you're in some industrial safety space or whatever, you're actually affecting your entire population, right? Just on that note, and then we can turn it over to any other questions, or we can ask a few questions of the panel. But the things that have happened since then is, so my firm right now, and other firms as well, in the Canadian federal government space, we're doing things like we're putting in a nuclear safety system using this technology now. So safety reporting, transportation agency reporting. I don't know if you've heard about Lac Mégantic, but we had a major train accident that essentially wiped out a town in Canada, right? And so train safety and other airline safety issues are top of mind. To correctional services. So running of prisons, And we have new legislation coming along around victim management or victim reporting. That's all being run on this technology now, or starting to. To Treasury Board, our central government funding agency, so Department of Finance, but also Treasury Board, which manages the allocation of funds for projects and whatnot, that's now being run by this technology. So the applications, Bruce showed you sort of a slide up there that had all the different use cases. It's almost limitless what the use cases can be with on this, and if you sort of master that, then it's repeatable, and then people will start getting used to it, and that's how you start this wave of change across an entire government. So on that note, I had a few questions that I could sort of ask the panels. Are there any other questions right now, though, from you all, or? No? Okay, so I'd kind of lead off by saying, it's funny. So this is a Dun & Bradstreet sponsored discussion, and I think it really does have a time with them. But I'd ask Vimal. So why Dun & Bradstreet? What is the value proposition you bring to customer service?
Right. So you heard references to trusted data, right? Trusted reference data. That's what we deliver. We're the world's largest provider of commercial information about businesses. And as part of what our value proposition delivers, it's having access to unique and unambiguous identity resolution of that entity, right, that business entity that you're working with. Second is rich firmographic information that help you understand that entity in a better way. And third one is having information that allows you to predict some level of their behavior. Where is this relevant? So think about the point of interaction when someone is filling out a form on a website. How many of you have seen people enter values incorrectly, even basic information like name, address, location, things like that? We've all seen that. It happens all the time. When you get information like that submitted by an external party, the ability to use a trusted reference source to reconcile and validate that information gives you the ability to always engage that entity or that person the right way, right? So they might have interacted with one of your departments as under a certain name. They might have interacted with another department under a different name because it might be a different division, a different subsidiary of that company that's interacting with you. Some of that is accidental. Some of that is also intentional, right? So fraud is not accidental, it happens by design. So using a reference source to be able to verify that this entity is who they say they are, they're representing themselves accurately, that's a big driver of the value proposition. So this is true for the government side, it's true for the commercial side. We use a framework to explain this to our customers and partners, which is there's the I see you, I know you, I can predict your behavior. Right? It's a simple way of thinking about an entity that interacts with, whether it's a person or a company that interacts with you, right? I see you is about uniquely and unambiguously identifying that person or that company. In the context of businesses, we do that using the DUNS number. DUNS number is a unique identifier that's assigned to every company, and we track that entity using that DUNS number over its lifetime, and we never reuse the DUNS number, right? So that's the ability to identify that entity. The next one is I know you, is once you've identified that entity, then the ability to attach rich firmographic information about that entity. So think about it in the context of understanding how big that company is, right? So sales, employees, these are basic firmographic attributes that tell you how big they are. You can think of their location using an address or using a lat-long data point. Again, tells you unambiguously where they're located. It matters for tax purposes, right? So you can think of any number of firmographic attributes that help you understand what that entity actually does, right? It's a business or a company. You can it helps you understand. That's the I know you component. And the third one is once you've built a data asset that tracks behavior of people and companies over a period of time, you then have the ability to predict their behavior. Experience. So I'll use a simple example of credit, right? So we were also a credit agency. which means we track whether that company is going to stay in business or go out of business in the future. So using information that we have about that entity, you can actually understand whether this company is going to stay in business over a period of time. And this is important if you're going to source a supplier. Right? You want two pieces of information about that supplier or that vendor. One is, have they paid their bills on time, and are they going to stay in business over the next several months, right? So from a supplier perspective, yes, you want to know that they're good business, but you also want to have the confidence that they're going to be around 6 months from now, so you can continue to source your products from them. So that's the value proposition we deliver, and where it becomes relevant is in any one of these processes, any one of these business processes that you might put in place. The process of onboarding a new customer, a participant, a vendor, requires you to, one, identify them. The process of maintaining that business relationship with them on an ongoing basis requires you to know some information about them. And then the decisions, the business decisions you might make based on information that we provide, as well as sourcing from multiple other external sources, allows you to then make those decisions with a high level of confidence.
So what I heard was it makes it much easier to provide that high customer service using good data quality, and you have more confidence in what you're doing with them, or whether they are who they actually are, right?
Absolutely.
So, and it is absolutely critical, especially if your organization is business facing, that you know who you're talking to. So that's where we've come in and become partners, and Webfortis have become partners of Dun & Bradstreet. It's a natural tie-in when we're trying to do these type of initiatives, right? Speaking of Webfortis, so Webfortis is a firm much like mine. They're US based. They're actually based here in the Bay Area as well. We're alliance members, and we do much the same thing. Sam, actually, I guess the question for you that I have is, what is your experience in state, local, federal with this technology? Is it similar to Canada, or where are you on the spectrum in adoption of these type of practices?
Sure. So, I mean, kind of bringing the conversation together from the previous speakers, I think that the conversation of technology being the easy part is actually very true nowadays. The harder part is addressing the larger needs of the organization as it relates to process, policy, and data. Because a lot of times what we see is we come into an organization and they kind of say, hey, can you help us with the problem? But as you kind of delve into the actual conversation, what starts off as the initial problem is not really the end problem that you're really trying to solve, right? And so what we do is we help our customers figure out that path on how to get to that end solution that they're really trying to drive at. And the best analogy I use in terms of non-technical analogy is, the difference between a shelter and a home, right? I have a roof, I have some walls, and if you give me some technology, I'll build you something that kind of fits that need, just to cover your basis of safety and safety, warmth, and whatever else, right? But I can also build you a home where I enjoy being at home, I get what I want from home, and in the end, it delivers that experience that I'm trying to get at from either a customer side, if I invite someone into my house, or from a person who actually resides there, actually using my home, to actually enjoy that full experience of servicing, in this case, the people that may be part of that home experience, versus in the business sense, what solution you're trying to drive at, right? And that's hugely important, because without that capability of seeing the bigger picture, you'll never be able to really develop the synergies and the desired outcomes that your organization is trying to get, right? Within the state of California, we have customers such as Department of State Hospitals, Department of Business Oversight. They're using our applications, starting with CRM as the foundation. We've built applications like public records, a public records management tool, case management tools to handle housing and community services, 311 applications and constituent management. And the beauty of it is that we start off as a technology conversation, but at the end it becomes truly a transformational conversation. And those organizations that are willing to engage at that level see the biggest benefits as a result of efficiency, customer service and satisfaction. And really, in the end, what you end up seeing is, the end goal for a lot of these kind of implementations is having a single version of the truth of the customer. Right? That's hard to get at, because you typically have many siloed systems along the way that you need to kind of figure out I think the analogy you use is someone calls in from one part of the organization and they try to get a different answer as a different part. That's the holy grail, right? And so when you kind of address that internal piece and merge it with Dun & Bradstreet's, data matching and quality capabilities, you've really hit, home run with regards to transformation within your organization.
That's great, thank you. I'll just address my last question to the entire board. Maybe we can go through it. If you could just let me know your thoughts around some of the practical transformation challenges. Because as much as we believe that the technology has risen to the challenge, the transformation answer was definitely challenging at times, right? I remember I spent two years of a lot of time overtime there, and I know you spent a lot of time on that too. So maybe with Bruce starting, just similar to the challenges that you saw, and maybe if you have any solutions as well.
I think interestingly enough, the biggest challenge is changing the way the internal workforce thinks so that it doesn't derail the transformation. So I'll give you an example. When you centralize the intake process for applications, as I described earlier, and you provide the means by which, through self-service, status can be found, password resets and security changes can be done. That's only as good as the number of staff members who refuse to do it for you on the phone. Seriously. So there's that cultural transformation, that the change management piece that we spend a lot of time on, because what's happening is I mentioned to you about freeing up staff time for value-added activities. Well, if they insist on doing it, they're not freeing up their time, they're not providing the value add, the outcomes aren't being realized. So we spend a great deal of time on change management, and I would say that's probably the hidden culprit in reducing the real effectiveness of transformation initiatives. The cultural, along with the change in process and the supporting technology.
I think just to jump on that conversation, I think the key aspect of change management that we see as a critical success factor is executive commitment. If you can champion this transformation initiative, but you have the executive commitment really pushing that conversation down to why you need to do it, why does it matter? Because the world is changing today. The citizens and how they are engaging your organization is vastly different than it was 5-10 years ago, right? And you need to adjust to the current state of how you need to relate to the citizens. That is what invariably I think we see a lot of, is we see as a huge determination of the desired outcome of achieving optimal organizational performance and satisfaction, not only from the external perspective, but from the workforce that's being impacted by that transformation. So I mean, that's huge from my perspective.
Vimal?
I would say making sure that the process shifts to a more proactive response rather than a reactive response. That helps across a number of different business functions, right? So I'll just use the example of if the initiative is to ensure that you have good quality information about in your systems and your processes. Most data quality processes have historically been reactive, right? Let's remove bad data from our systems. If you can move upstream and start defining a process to prevent the creation of those bad data issues, then you're much better positioned, right, to scale more effectively. So I'm just using data quality as one example, but any transformation program, it'll allow you to scale much more effectively if you're thinking proactive rather than reactive, right? Prevent the issue from occurring in the first place.
So I think we have time for one or two questions, if anybody else has anything. Yes?
So your comment, we're standing up a service center statewide. So our end users are used to going to their own internal service centers and getting assistance with their legacy systems, and now suddenly they're having to come to us. And now like that.
Yep.
Sounds similar to what, how did you deal with that? I mean, how did you maintain a level of customer service when truthfully, like you said, you had to just tell people, you have to go that way?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's a common reality when, if I hear you right, you're centralizing the service offering. What we did, and I think it comes down to being practical, was from a change management perspective, and we didn't get it perfect every time, but from a change management perspective, we spent a lot of time communicating the why we were doing it, the potential benefits to the organization, and then we recognized that we had a really small window to get people on board. So we did adjust staff levels to make sure that when the local calls, in your case, were not being answered, that they got the same level of service, which I mentioned on one of my slides, as what they saw as the traditional support value. Now, we knew that we couldn't support that level of staffing long-term, but in that immediate kind of blip, if you will, to make sure that we gave as few people as possible the opportunity to say, see, I told you it doesn't work. And we're prone to do that. So I would suggest that was one of the approaches. And then we also went to great extents to ask for continued feedback from the internal staff as well as the external staff. So not to belabor this, but it made a big difference. For example, when we launched the new system, every single screen on the portal had the ability to provide feedback. Now, our intention was not to continue down that road necessarily forever, but it made people say, I don't like this, I don't like that. And we made sure that we got back to them to say, okay, we're not going to address that right now, we're not able to in our cycles, but we heard you, and when we do, we'll get back to you. We did the same internally. Provided internal staff who might have thought perhaps that the responsiveness was less than what they were used to have an opportunity to feed back. And that kind of continual cycle, it wasn't perfect, but it helped us get over the hump. Hope that helps.
Any other questions? So we do have a case study. I didn't bring any copies of it though. But if you go to the D&B booth or you approach me, I can give you my business card and I'll email you it out. It is a good case study to show executives or even keep yourself and just explain what you're trying to do. So certainly I'm happy to share that if you like. Any other thoughts or?
We're good.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.